Everybody, welcome to the inaugural series of videos I'm going to put out. I figure the best way to start in wine is to talk about winery cleanliness. So we're going to go through a little three-part series here. First one with winery cleanliness, then we're going to move into winery sanitation, maybe some barrel sanitation, and then HACCP, hazard analysis and critical control points. So this is the first of the series, so let's roll with it. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about some definitions, difference between cleaning and sanitizing. Why do we clean? What do we clean in a winery? And what do we use to clean? So what are the fundamental things that we need to do at a base level to be able to be, good stewards of the winery environment? So the thing is, why is cleanliness so important? So first off, let me get this right through your heads right now. If you do not want to clean, you do not want to be organized, you do not want to keep things in place, leave. Do not pay attention anymore. Get out of the wine industry because you need to be very proficient at keeping things clean in order to foster an environment for the microbes that we want to live and keep the bad actors out that would love to invade our wine and do terrible things to it. So the importance of sanitation is really to improve our quality and consistency. Of course, product safety, which is becoming more and more important as time moves on. It's going to improve ageability if we don't have any bad actors getting into bottles. If I had $1 for every time I had a winemaker that was upset that they had something bloom in bottle or go bad in bottle, I'd have quite a few dollars today. And the other thing is we really want to look at that microbiological stability in wine, especially as so many wineries like to move into more of an unfiltered environment. It makes for a really important thing for us to do is to make sure we've got good, clean winery sanitation. And we want to have some protocols put in place basically so that we can have all of our staff and everybody who's working in the winery reduce risk. It reduces worry. You can sleep at night if you're not worrying about bad things growing in your wine. And also, if we have good protocols, we're going to reduce our chemical usage and reduce our water usage. And water is becoming a really, really important part of all things winemaking as it becomes more and more of a scarce resource. And we should be good stewards of that water as well. And so the other thing too is if we're doing protocols and putting things in place, we're going to do things quickly and efficiently and keep our labor costs down as well. So reducing chemical cost, water cost, and labor cost. Super important stuff. So we're going to talk about winery cleaning protocols, when to clean. Do we do it before or after? Some wineries do both. Some clean the tanks before and sanitize before going into them, and also afterwards. Depends on the winery, depends on the protocols. Again, every winery is a little different because they're all going to have different risk hierarchies depending on the wine that they're going to be making. If you're making pH 3.0 Riesling, you probably can get away with a little bit more than you can making pH 4.0 Syrah. Because the environment is so much different for microbes to grow in. What chemicals are we going to use? We're going to talk about them. What we're going to clean with, why water temp is important, why water quality is important, and the mechanics involved in cleaning as well. Then we're going to go through the equipment and all the different things that you're going to need in order to be an effective winery cleaner. So we're going to talk about cleaning. And cleaning is just getting rid of the food. It's getting rid of all of the substrates that microorganisms could grow in. So what we want to do is get rid of things that will make the winery a hospitable place for bad actors to move in and grow and then possibly take over our wine at some point in time. So we want to get rid of the food source of bugs. And when I say bugs, I mean microorganisms. But realistically, I'm just trying to keep this as basic as possible. So the thing is, if we don't have food, they don't want to live here. So cleanliness is really important, and it's going to depend on the winery. It's going to depend on the winery's tolerance to outside organisms. Some people don't like to clean because they like the terroir or the naturalness of the facility. And if you are okay with certain things growing in your wine and winery, then go right ahead. So again, it's your level of risk acceptance. So I've also had wines from wineries that are very dirty and fantastic. I've had wines that are terrible from dirty wineries. And I've also had wines that are terrible from wines that are overtly clean. And sometimes you spend so much time cleaning, you forget to make the wine. So again, it's all this ability to try and decide what's appropriate for the type of wine that you're trying to produce. And the thing is the level of organization is also going to matter. So a small winery that's trying to be artisanal and natural may have some willingness to accept variability in their product quality. They're going to have ability to accept different flaws or faults that other wineries might not accept because it's part of their artistic palette. Whereas, a larger winery that's going to be selling into a large chain or grocery store internationally doesn't have a lot of risk acceptance because if they were to try to sell their wine and something were to go wrong, or it was deemed unacceptable by a critic or some customers at a local store, they're going to have to do a product recall, which is tremendously expensive. So in larger wineries, they tend to have to run a much cleaner ship, and many of them have really intense standards that they're trying to meet, almost food safety standards, in order to make sure that wine is absolutely as clean and perfect as possible. And so it has really good consistency year in and year out, because they're shipping all over the country, and those wines need to taste the same no matter where they go. But the thing is that cleanliness for real is something that you can see. You can touch it, you can feel it, you can see if something's wrong. If the floor's got slime molds, if you've got dirty drains, you can smell it. And one of my idols in the wine industry always said, I know the second I'll do business with a winery when I walk in the door, because your nose knows and you smell. And as soon as you smell something bad, you see something bad, you can tell if a winery is clean. And if you're in doubt at all about what cleaning protocols should be done maybe in the wine industry, check out the dairy industry. I mean, we're talking about something that's much more easily spoiled than wine, where wine is very easily protected because it has a lot of acid. We've got alcohol in our favor. The dairy industry doesn't have that. You've got a basically neutral, sugary product, because the lactose in milk is quite easily spoiled. So leave milk on a counter for a day or two and you know what happens to it pretty quick. Whereas wine is far more stable. So if you want a really clean ship, follow some of the cleaning protocols that you would see in the dairy industry. But we'll run through a few here. But I kind of want to talk about what cleanliness looks like in the wine industry. And this is the reality, is that you have to look at things from the standpoint of a microorganism. So in grape juice, we have a lot of things. We have sugar, which is wonderful. Everything wants sugar. I want sugar. You want sugar. Everything likes sugar. And so many of the microbes out there want to consume all the sugar in the grape juice. The good news is we have yeast on our side that will eventually take over, ferment, and create alcohol, and they'll dominate and take up most of the sugar themselves. But until that point in time, we may have a lot of other things that want to have at it. So in grape juice, we've got sugar, we've got different proteinaceous compounds in the form of amino acids. We've got all sorts of things that microorganisms would like to consume. So basically, just a giant buffet. So if you were a microorganism, you'd look at grape juice and go, yum, I want to get in that. Well, our job is to keep the number of microorganisms that want to get after our grape juice to a minimum, and keep only the actors that we want, namely Saccharomyces and Enococcus, to take over our fermentations. But in a clean winery, where we've gotten rid of all the food sources, so in a clean winery, we've managed to clean the floors, we've managed to sanitize the tanks, we've managed to make sure that the winery is immaculate. There's nothing that's going to want to just come in and live there as a course of action. I mean, there are a few things that like Brussels sprouts. I like Brussels sprouts, provided they're fried with enough butter and bacon fat. They're quite delicious. But basically, as a whole, not a lot of things want to come into a winery. Now, you can't get a winery completely clean. There's always going to be something around. There's always going to be something lurking. But the idea is to keep the amount of food around so low that microorganisms just aren't going to want to populate and grow. So you aren't going to have a bunch of acetobacter, which would make vinegar, or glucotabacter, or maybe Brettanomyces, or other things that we can get into our wine, just sort of lurking in the corner, waiting for the opportunity to jump on an implement that accidentally gets set on the floor or something, and then insert into the wine and be able to inoculate our wine with something bad. So the idea here is just to try and get rid of all of the extra food sources, all the grape skins and the sticky grape juice and anything that's around, just keeping that down to a minimum. So the thing is, what type of cleaning equipment are we going to need? Well, we've got to talk about personal protective equipment first off. We're going to need to have some good boots. And there's a variety of good boots out there, whether they're redbacks or they're muck boots, something that's got some decent support for you because you're going to be on your feet all day, and also something that's waterproof to make sure that you're not going to have wet feet. Now, one of the big thing is about when we're cleaning a winery, frequently we're using some sort of caustic chemical, high pH chemical, and then followed by a low pH rinse. And a lot of these things can get on your skin and be very agitating and can be irritating. So personal protective equipment is really important, and starting with your feet is top of the order. Then additionally, we're going to have some safety goggles and gloves, because we're working with some caustic chemicals that can burn our skin. So if you want to have a long, healthy career in the wine industry, especially during a busy vintage, you're going to want to protect yourself first off, because what you're trying to do is destroy stuff that microorganisms are going to want to live on, and that means that you're kind of like a big, organism, and most of the stuff that we're using to clean will act on you as well. So the other things we're going to need is we're going to need equipment. We're going to need some sort of scrubbing material, whether it be a brush or a sponge, to be able to get really hard and attached detritus like tarch titrates or some sort of protein deposits or biofilms. We're going to be able to break those up. We're also going to require some buckets to transfer cleaning equipment or cleaning solutions around in. And then we're going to need some sort of pumps and pressure washers in order to create agitation enough to clean, whether it be the floor or the tanks or the inside of the barrel. So specialized equipment is required in order to be able to adequately clean a winery. So what do the levels of clean look like? So just some examples of wineries that I've seen. These are pictures I've taken, only a couple of the many. But these aren't low-end places. These were all taken, actually 3 of these were taken at first growth chateaus in France. And so the one on the left, which you can't really see in the drain, is actually the guts of a rat floating in the floor drain that was plugged up, and it smelled quite impressively. And then the other one is, you've just got raw wine that's basically vinegar growing on a valve, and it's a ball valve. So when you open it up and you were to jiggle the valve and you smelled it, it was vinegar inside of that valve. So if it hadn't, been taken apart or cleaned before it gets filled up again, you've got a really good opportunity to introduce a whole bunch of vinegar bacteria into your wine. And then the other one is, of course, mold growing around a bunghole. And, in the barrel cleaning series, we're going to talk a whole lot about how you keep your bunghole properly clean. But realize that cleanliness, again, I want to get back to this idea that it's something that you can see, you can touch, and you can feel. So this is an example of some wineries that could use a little bit of TLC. And then this is what I would call industrial clean, where you're at a big winery, and this was me on a tour, and actually that's back of my friend Levi's head. But, it doesn't look particularly clean, but the thing is they're cleaning the inside of the tanks, and that's what's more important, is that inside of the tank rather than the outside. So when you're looking at the outdoors, you're like, well, that's not so great, but as long as the inside is clean. But one of the most important things about this picture has absolutely nothing to do with cleaning. If you take a look at the tank, you notice it's got rounded shoulders. This is what happens to harvest interns that forget to vent the tank. So if you are so inclined to pump out a tank before you vent the top of it, you will implode it. But you'll say, hey, Tim, that tank isn't imploded. It looks like it's been exploded. Yeah, that's because an intern imploded it. And then what you do is you have to seal the tank back up, pressurize it with either water or air, and then you pop the top back out. And now that you've seen this, you're going to go to wineries and check it out. See how many you can find that have been folded in. And I think just about every year, probably a few hundred interns across the world manage to get fired because they implode a tank. But we'll talk about that in winery safety later. And then this is winery clean. And I just put this up here. It actually isn't that immaculate of a picture. It's just my daughter, and she's cute, and so I'm a sucker. Anyway, but the fact of the matter is we take a look at the floor. We've got a clean floor, but I can see a few things in this picture that really aren't that great. So if we take a look at the left-hand side, right underneath the tanks, we can see a couple of black mold spaces. And these are two things that probably would want to get in and get cleaned up. So on the day that we were doing this picture, we came in with a little peroxyacetic acid and then went through and cleaned up those hot spots, because it's pretty obvious by the drains and other tanks. We got a few hot spots that we can see that aren't really that great. And so you kind of keep touching up wineries all the time. So cleaning is sort of a never-ending process in the wine industry. So let's go through a basic sanitation regime. Basically, after you empty a tank or you empty a barrel, you want to pre-rinse and remove any major debris and wet the surface. Then we want to apply a detergent or scrubbing or clean in place material to the tank. So tank or hose or anything that's cleanable. So we'll want to add, usually that detergent generally is either sodium percarbonate or sodium hydroxide, but usually a base, and then we rinse it, then we neutralize that detergent, usually in this case with an acid, and then we might sanitize that object before we fill it back up, and then we would rinse again if needed. And we're not going to talk about sanitation in this lecture because it's a whole different sort of topic, but generally what we do is we want to rinse, clean, neutralize, set down, and then either fill or let sit for a while. So let's talk about what those cleaners might be. So first off, water is the most important thing. Having good, clean, non-chlorinated water is absolutely paramount. Then we also have anionic cleaners that are basic. We have soda ash, which is pretty common, and sodium hydroxide, which is caustic soda, which is probably the most common used in large winery scenarios. Then we have cationic cleaner, and we're going to talk about sulfuric and phosphoric and some of the other sulfumic acids that we use, and also peracetic acid. And then we're going to talk about you, because you're the most important cleaner of all, is the operators, the people that are in these scenarios where they're working to clean the winery. So our first one is sodium hydroxide, also known as caustic soda. pH is up to about 14 depending on concentration. It's a really effective cleaner. It gets rid of organics really well. Removes tartrates, oils, and fats. It's pretty inexpensive. The downside is it can burn you, especially in high concentrations. I have burned my feet really badly. I worked at a large winery where somebody decided to clean the floor, and they brought concentrated 6 molar sodium hydroxide, poured it on the floor where I was going to be working all day, and then forgot to A, tell me, and B, forgot to then rinse down the floor for about 3 hours while I walked back and forth in it. And I burned my feet pretty bad. So I would like to say that you want to be careful with this stuff and be especially communicative to those around you if you happen to be using it. The other downside is it's got high sodium. So when we're putting sodium down the drain, that can be an issue. It can be an issue for not only the facilities around, if there's water treatment facilities, but if you're putting your water out to a pond or an evaporation pond, or you're going to be using that water at some other point in time for irrigation, sodium can be an issue for soil. So that's another issue for another time, but just realize the downside to sodium hydroxide is that sodium. And also we're going to have to rinse it off with some sort of acid, because the last thing we want to do is put our nice acidic wine with all that beautiful natural acidity in it into a wine that's got a base in it, and to a tank that's got a base in it, and then you manage to neutralize your wine, which is not exactly the best thing to do. So it's got some moderate sterilizing factor in winery concentrations, but primarily we like to think of it as a cleaner. Then sodium carbonate, also known as soda ash. This is really common use in smaller wineries. It would be something I would like to use around with my students when I was an instructor, because it's not likely to burn you as badly. It's still effective, but not as effective. When you got to get the job done at the end of the day, it is nice to bring out the caustic soda, but sodium carbonate's nice. It's also inexpensive. The downsides, again, are about the same. It's just not as strong. And again, that sodium going down the drain is always not a lot of fun, especially if you're dealing with some sort of septic on site where you're going to use that water for some other purpose. And then I want to talk about cationic cleaners, also known as acidic cleaners, also known, like the most common one is known as star sand, which is one I like quite a bit. And it's got a strong acid. It's got a strong low pKa, usually below 1.0. And then we also have phosphoric and sulfumic acid. And they're usually a combination of all these, and it's combined with a surfactant. And I love this stuff. You spray it on, and it foams all over. And as it runs down the tank, it's really, really nice at removing biofilms. And it's just a wonderful addition to your cleaning regime. So what I typically recommend is that you do some sort of anionic cleaner followed by some sort of acidic rinse, not this kind of rinse, just on your day-to-day cleaning. But then at the end of the week or something, just come in and spray everything down with something like this, and it just takes out the biofilms, polishes up the stainless, everything looks really, really nice. Something I recommend, something I kind of stumbled into the last few years in the wine industry, and something I've really come to like quite a bit from a cleanliness standpoint, something I picked up personally from the brewing industry, but just a great addition to your overall sanitation regime. I want to talk about citric acid, and primarily the reason I want to talk about citric acid is it needs to go away. So why does citric acid need to go away? Well, it's not a cleaner. It's not at all. It's used commonly in wineries. Why? Well, because it's a really good way to rinse off those caustic cleaners, and it's really inexpensive. It's not so bad in that sense. It's very economically sound. But what it's not good at is that it's an attractant for all kinds of microbes. If you look up another name for the Krebs cycle or the TCA cycle, it's also known as the citric acid cycle. That's because everything likes citric acid. Everything eats it. It is a bevy of nutrients for microbes. So here we are cleaning our winery, then we're spraying it down with food. This is not a smart move. And it took me a long time to get away from citric because I'd been trained that you had a little citric and a little sulfur, and when you spray the winery down and you start coughing because you're breathing in, SO2 gas, nothing like little sulfur dioxide gas into your lungs and burning them, to know that your winery is clean. Let's go ahead and injure our employees. Bravo, wine industry, for doing this for pretty much ever. So we need to kind of move away from this, not only from a health standpoint of adding citric and sulfur and breathing that all day, but additionally, it's a food source. And once that SO2 is gone, you've got something that's going to attract all sorts of microbes. So anecdotally, from me, and also some numerous other winemakers, as soon as you moved peracetic acid as a rinse, which is basically acetic acid, which is vinegar, as your acid rinse, and with a little bit of hydrogen peroxide in it, as you move that to your rinse, the peroxide does a fantastic job of eliminating any gram-positive bacteria. And then all the black slime molds that I used to see on the floors when you were using citric just went away. Just a fantastic way to make your winery a little bit cleaner and not have as many bad microbes around, especially lactic acid microbes that do thrive in citric acid. Let them be gone. So let citric acid be done with. Let us not talk of this again, and let us move on. I'm sure there are citric acid manufacturers around the world wanting to stab me in the back of the head right now, but I just want to let you know that this is not the best thing to be using as a rinse agent in your winery. And most importantly, elbow grease. You just got to do it. Regular maintenance is really important. Use your eyes and look for hot spots. And these are all pictures I've taken from different wineries over the years. The one up on the top left is one of my favorites. I went to a winery and I just walked in the door and they were talking about how they were having problems. And they told me that their Riesling was re-fermenting, but only one bottle in every case was re-fermenting. And I immediately asked them if they had a 12-head filler on their bottling line. They said, "How did you know that we have a 12-head filler?" I said, "Well, let me go back and take a look at your 12-head filler." And the gasket up on the top left was one of the filters that had been damaged and hadn't been cleaned well or had been replaced poorly. And so when they were bottling, basically that dirty filler head, every time it bottled the sterile filtered wine, it was introducing a couple yeast cells into each bottle. And they had to recall about 5,000 cases of Riesling because they had a re-ferment. So that could have been easily avoided in a sanitation regime by just looking at it and noting that it was damaged. So realistically, regular maintenance is important. You just clean it, keep on top of it. It's like cleaning your room. If you clean your room every day, it's not a big deal. If you don't clean your room for a month, it's a big deal. And then you find all sorts of terrible things in your room. So just stay on top of it. And also don't make an overt mess. If you can control the mess, then you can also control how much cleaning you have to do. So again, look for hot spots. The places I see the most terrible things are drains. Drains are not cleaned as well as they should be, and you judge a winery by its drains. Another thing you want to look at is valves. Notorious winemaker problems are going and pulling from valves and not cleaning the valve afterwards. Tasting valves especially are terrible. And then also, if you really want to have a freak out moment, if you haven't taken apart your ball valves, your butterfly valves, do it. About once a year, you should take all your valves apart, clean them, and put them back together. And you will be shocked and amazed at the things that are growing in there. So just valves and tasting valves are horrendous. And again, fittings and barrels are a nightmare. We're going to talk about barrels on their own right, but barrels are just such an unbelievable challenge from a cleaning standpoint. I love barrels, so don't think I'm going to be bad-mouthing barrels from that standpoint, but unbelievably challenging from a sanitation and cleaning standpoint. So let's talk about keys to effective cleaning. First off, how long is the chemical on the surface? Got to have effective contact time. And it has to have an effective concentration. So you've got to follow the manufacturer's recommendations, aka read the label. And also, as part of FSMA in America, all of your cleaning containers actually have to have the manufacturer's label for usage on the bucket that you are cleaning on. So if you're going to be using, whether it's the 60-gallon brutes or just 5-gallon buckets, whatever you're using, if a federal regulator shows up and wants to take a look at your winery cleaning situation, you need to make sure to have those labels laminated and affixed to your cleaning apparatus. So that way you're adding them properly. Also, you need to have an SOP or standard operating procedure that outlines exactly how you're mixing up your chemical concentration and when you're supposed to do it and how you clean. That's just a bare minimum that you're going to be required for your compliance in running a winery. So not only do we have contact time, concentration, we also need to talk about the temperature of the cleaner. So does it need to be warm or cold? The hotter it is, the more effective it's going to be, but the last thing you're going to want to do is mix some sort of volatile chemical that's hot. So really read the manufacturer's instructions, but I assure you, hot caustic soda is a fabulous way for cleaning things. Then we got to talk about mechanical action. There's got to be some scrubbing action, whether it's that or a high pressure spray or some sort of agitation, in order to make sure that cleaning stuff is all getting done. So we've got to have our contact time, our chemical concentration, some sort of mechanical action to make sure that it's happening, and making sure that we've got warm water to clean with. I can assure you, cleaning a winery with cold water is not fun. Back in the 90s with my dad up at Creekside Cellars in Colorado, we didn't have hot water, and when it was 34 degrees out and you're trying to scrub tartrates off a tank, it doesn't matter how good your chemical concentration is or the contact time, because those tartrates ain't coming off, especially if it's on a plastic tank. So hot water was something that I didn't have for the first few years of my career. So it's really fun to have nice warm water now, because that certainly helps to get things clean. I want to talk about clean in place. CIP is really coming on strong because the machines are getting better, they're getting less expensive, and there's also kind of an evolution in the wine industry in general to get away from having people in tanks. We don't want people in things, especially when there's an opportunity for carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide poisoning. So we really want to make sure that we use CIP whenever possible. And so even just using your pumps in-house and using some sort of a good agitator head, we can do this with just your pumps, or you can get a nicer CIP system. The downside is these are expensive equipment, and you've still got to check manually to make sure things are clean. But CIP systems are becoming more the norm, and I think people are getting more used to doing clean in place than they used to. I used to go to wineries and they'd have people on ladders in tanks scrubbing them, and I think as time has gone on, we're moving to definitely more mechanical stuff. And as labor is getting to get tighter and tighter for the wine industry, I think we're going to see more and more clean in place rather than just throwing labor at it to scrub and clean tanks. But of course, there's good old manual, and it's only as good as the person. I mean, you're only going to clean as well as the person, that's the individual who's in that tank, who's doing the cleaning, or scrubbing the floor or cleaning the drains. And that's going to be up to you as the person in the cellar. I can assure you, a person that is very good at cleaning is invaluable. The downside to manual cleaning is that it's pretty much relegated to most small wineries. Most big wineries are using a lot of clean in place stuff, but they still need somebody to scrub the drains and make sure everything's looking good and all the valves are straight. The downside is you've got human error. You've got people who just aren't paying attention. And I've seen people pump cleaners into finished wine because the training wasn't done adequately or they weren't paying attention. The downside is you've got some bigger equipment you got to carry around. It's a lot slower when you're dealing with people. And you've also got people. So people are working with chemicals. They're working with hot water. We've got hoses and trip environments. We've got possible slip and fall environment. And so we've got a complex industry that we're working in, and so there may be some liability to having more people around. So, although humans are wonderful, the downside is that we are imperfect, and there's some liability issues that come with it. So it's where we all get our start in the wine industry. So if you think you're going to jump into the wine industry 2 feet forward and suddenly run to be a winemaker, you got a lot of bungholes to scrub and drains to clean well before you get to that vaunted place where you stare at spreadsheets every day as a head winemaker. So anyway, let's move along. So here's some references. If you want to look a little bit more, I do want to point out that all the pictures were either mine or by Gary Weber. And then here's a number of people who have been fantastic teaching me about winery cleanliness over the years. And feel free, if you're a winemaker and you didn't see something you wanted to hear about in the comment section, write it up. I mean, I think this should be, I'm putting this out here for free, and I'd love to hear other comments. And I think the goal here is just to create a collaborative environment where we all just make the wine industry just a little bit better. Cheers.